Welcome to Talk Wave, making waves, one talk at a time.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a case out of Walton County, Georgia. It's the case of William and Zachary Zulak.
Right.
And this is really rough stuff. It involves the abuse of their two adopted sons, and it went on for years.
Yeah.
So, trigger warning, obviously.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of source material on this. We have court documents, statements from the district attorney, and a number of news reports that detail the extent of the abuse. It's
Yeah, it's tough.
It is, and we're gonna get into all that.
Yeah.
But I think that the big question here is how could this happen? And what does this case tell us about the systems that are supposed to protect kids, vulnerable children?
Well, I think one of the things that's really striking about this case is just the premeditation.
Right.
We're not talking about like a one-off bad decision. This was a pattern of abuse, and they were, brazen enough to actually document some of it on their home surveillance system.
What?
So, the level of like planning and then the violation of trust. I mean, these were their adoptive parents. It's
Yeah.
really chilling.
It's very hard to wrap your head around what those boys must have gone through. I mean,
Wow.
to be brought into what they think is a loving home, only to be subjected to that, it's really heartbreaking.
It's awful. The psychological scars of child sexual abuse they're deep. They last a really long time. These boys they have such a long road ahead of them in terms of trying to heal, and the impacts are probably going to stay with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And it makes you think about adoption. I mean, it's such a beautiful thing, to provide families for kids who need them, but it's not without its problems.
Right.
It's just,
For sure.
and so how did this even come to light? It wasn't a neighbor or a teacher.
Right.
It was a cyber tip from the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
That's right. And that really sort of highlights how big of a role technology plays in these types of crimes, both in how they're committed and how they're uncovered. So in this case, the tip came from CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material, that was uploaded to a Google account.
Oh, wow.
That digital footprint, that's what got them caught.
Wow, thank goodness for NCMEC,
Yeah.
They're on the front lines of this fight, using technology to track down abusers, rescue victims. But let's get into the specifics of the charges against the Zulaks. We're not just talking about a single offense.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
We're talking about a whole slew of horrific crimes.
Yeah, the charges included aggravated sodomy, child molestation, sexual exploitation of children, and pandering, which, to be clear, that means recruiting or soliciting someone to perform sexual acts. And, like we were saying earlier, they were so brazen that they actually documented some of the abuse on their home surveillance system.
It's unbelievable. It's just hard to believe that someone could be so lacking in remorse
Right.
or any kind of understanding of the gravity of what they've done.
Wow.
But thankfully, the justice system responded to this. It responded swiftly and decisively.
Yeah, both of them got life in prison, no parole.
Yeah.
And District Attorney Randy McGinley said pretty clearly that the sentence was meant to send a message, that this kind of abuse of children is not going to be tolerated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the consequences of all of this,
Yeah.
they go beyond the Zulaks.
Right.
There was another man, Hunter Lawless, who received CSAM from Zachary Zulak. He got sentenced to 20 years.
Yeah. 12 of those will be served in prison.
Yeah.
And then Luis Vizcarro Sanchez, who exchanged messages with the couple about the abuse.
Right.
He plead guilty to pandering for a person under 18. He got 16 years.
Wow.
And 15 of those will be served. This case really shows just how far-reaching the impact of these crimes can be.
Yeah.
And how important it is to hold, everyone involved accountable.
It's a reminder that these crimes, these kinds of crimes often involve a whole network of people.
Yeah.
They all play a role in creating this material, distributing it or consuming it. It's a complicated problem with devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And it just shows how much we need like a multifaceted approach. We need stronger laws, we need better technology, we need to have a real shift in society that makes child safety the priority. But that's something we can talk about later.
Yeah.
For now, we really have to just sit with the suffering that these boys have been through and the really long road to healing that they face.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that, as awful as this case is, thankfully it's not representative of all adoptive families.
Right.
But it does make you wonder about the system, Are there vulnerabilities that make it possible for someone who wants to hurt children to slip through the cracks?
Yeah, it's natural to question the process, after something like this happens.
Right.
When trust is betrayed in such a horrific way.
Yeah.
So what are the steps involved, in screening people who want to adopt?
Well, typically, there's a pretty in-depth home study.
Okay.
They look at the family's home environment, their financial stability, and, their overall suitability to provide a safe and nurturing home.
Right.
And, of course, background checks.
Yeah.
Those are standard, but they go beyond just criminal history.
Right.
They interview references. Sometimes they look at social media activity. And in some cases, they even do psychological evaluations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty rigorous.
It is, yeah.
But are there areas where it could be strengthened? I mean, are there things that we could do to minimize the risk of this happening again?
Well, there are always ways to improve. Some people think that psychological screening should be even more comprehensive,
Okay.
especially for people who have experienced trauma in their own past.
Yep.
And others say that, social workers need more training. Training that specifically helps them spot red flags,
Right.
potential warning signs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's a tough balance.
Yeah.
We want to keep kids safe, but we also don't want to make it harder for loving families to adopt.
Right. We don't want to discourage good people from stepping up.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where, we prioritize child safety without discouraging people who genuinely want to provide a home.
Right.
Ultimately, we want a system that leads to successful and loving adoptions while minimizing the risk to kids.
I think that's a great goal.
Yeah.
We've talked about, the legal consequences of this case and ways to reform the adoption system. But I think we should talk about the psychology of abusers.
Yeah.
What would lead someone to commit such horrific acts against children, especially within a family?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer. Child sexual abuse it's really complex. There's a lot of factors that play into it.
Okay. So I'm sure there are all kinds of theories out there about why people abuse children. I mean, is it a matter of mental illness?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
While some abusers may have underlying mental health conditions, we have to understand that mental illness doesn't necessarily lead to abusive behavior.
Right.
In fact, most people with mental health issues are not abusive.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to make. I mean, mental illness is already so stigmatized,
Yeah,
and it's often unfairly linked to violence.
absolutely. So we have to be careful about making generalizations.
Right.
While mental health can be a factor in some cases, it's not the only explanation.
Okay, so you mentioned a range of factors. What are some other theories or explanations that experts have come up with?
Well, some experts point to childhood trauma in the abuser's own past. If someone's experienced abuse themselves, it can distort their understanding of relationships and boundaries and make them more likely to repeat that cycle.